Our next speaker is going to be Gurman, and it's 12:45 time for the next speaker to come in, so I will directly jump to that talk. Now, Gurman is someone I've spoken to before in some other forum, and she's a data and a graphic journalist and at Reuters in Singapore. So she'll be joining us from Singapore at this point of time. Although I'm told that she is from Delhi, and that's where and that's great to have the Delhi association always, because we are this is the first time, by the way, we are doing World IA Day online, completely online. Before this, we would always do World IA Day at a physical location in Delhi. Uh, so Gurman, while she works at Reuters in Singapore, she tells stories with code. Uh, Her work is a combination of data extraction, analysis, and forming compelling narratives around data. Gurman is a self taught coder and a designer and holds a master's degree in journalism from Columbia University. With that, I would invite Gurman to please take the stage, share your presentation, and stuff.
Hello, everyone. Can everyone hear me okay? Good.
Yes, we can hear you fine.
Hi, I am Gurman, and today I'm going to be talking about visual narratives to feed the curiosity. If I'm going to talk about architecture, of course, this talk has an architecture and a structure, obviously. Of course, I will go in and say, hey, hi, I'm Gurman. I am a graphics and data journalist at Reuters. I'm originally from Delhi, as Souvik mentioned. I worked in local newsrooms in the US. I was also one of the key members of the first data team at Hindustan Times. I have 2 degrees in journalism, none in design or computer science. And I didn't know anything about information architecture or even what the term meant until Souvik called me. So that's me. In terms of what do I do, as he mentioned, my work is a combination of journalism, code, and design. If you're wondering what in the world does that mean, it means I take things like this, such as a sentence in a press release, and write some JavaScript code and turn it into a line of tractors. So those are the kind of things that I do. Um, and oh yeah, so yeah, a line of tractors. So that's the work I do. So where does information architecture come in all of this? I Googled, because I don't know anything about information architecture, and I got this definition that says it focuses on organizing and structuring content in an effective and sustainable way. Um, so organizing and structuring, I think, were 2 words that were familiar to me. And you know what else has structure? Stories. Stories have structure too. And today I am going to be talking about structuring stories and structuring experiences when you're telling stories. And thing is that journalists have like all these formulas or frameworks to structure these narratives. And we have these fun names for them. We have an inverted pyramid, we have a martini glass, we have an hourglass, we have the kebab, we have a diamond. Because journalists are very creative and all, so we come up with these creative and fun names for otherwise stories about depressing things like blasts and accidents and things like that. So the most typical form of stories that we would see a news report would be the inverted pyramid. What does the inverted pyramid look like? You bring out the most important information in the top, and as you go down, the importance of the information decreases. So the idea is if I walk into a story, even if I read the first paragraph, I will know what happened. And then if I want more details, I want to dig deeper, I keep going deep and deep and deep and deep. I can leave at any point in time and I would still know something. I will not walk away with without knowing what exactly happened. Here's an example of a visual story like that. This is from my time at HT. If you walk into the story, there's a headline that tells you something that has happened. And then with the T's, there's a graphic that just shows that margins have been decreasing. So elections have become less competitive. Sorry, more competitive. And then you say that in a paragraph. You explain what the story is right at the top, and then I tell you more bits and pieces about it. I actually show you how the median has shifted lower, how the breakdown, how the spread and the distribution has changed. And then I talk to some, candidates who have won with low margins and get their quotes and pick out more instances about it. I talk about how it's different by party. And towards the end, I maybe pick out a few constituencies that have very low margins consistently and say why that might be happening. So, like, it's a very straightforward structure. Even if the person left at the first scroll, they would know what the story is about. And as they keep going deeper, the information, the depth of the information just keeps going forward. Another story structure is a martini glass, but unfortunately, all I have is water with me right now. The martini glass structure is kind of like the inverted pyramid, but then after that, you give a good chronological order of events, and you have a strong ending. And this is great for like events and like things like a accident or a bomb blast or a riot, because there is a timeline that is important in the midst of all of this. So here's a story that we did after the tractor rally on Republic Day this year. And you walk into the page, we talk about, we're going to talk, you're on a tractor, you're in the rally, and then we tell you, this happened. There were clashes between the police and farmers. They are protesting because of this. And while on one hand you had the Republic Day parade, on the other you had this tractor rally. So we just base out the premise of what happened. And then I start giving you the chronology of events. I tell you that this is what the roots were, this is where people started, and then people broke barricades and went away from those routes. And then there were clashes between the police and the protesters. And exactly how did people get to the clash site? And once they were on the clash site, there was this whole thing about flags. So we talk about the flags at the clash site. And after all of this, towards the end, I come back to my tractor line because my tractor line is a strong ending to this otherwise, um, otherwise very chronological story, and you leave with an impact. That's the idea. So that's the martini glass. Now, another, bit is whether do you explore or do you explain? How do you interact with the reader? And how do you let the interactivity flow? And for that, we spill the martini glass. So if I spill the martini glass, I'm talking more in terms of the usability of the page now. And we start with an intro, and then I walk the reader through an experience. And then towards the end, I let the reader explore for themselves. So for the spilled martini glass, this is an example that some of my colleagues did about how herd immunity works. So it's this whole explainer. We have these simulations running that show you that according to different vaccinated populations, how does the spread occur? And you're looking at that. We compare it. We'll add a layer of social distancing, that if people are not moving and they are not vaccinated, what happens as opposed to when they are moving. We add a layer of vaccination to that and say that, ideally, if people don't move while a certain population is infected, vaccinated, how effective that is in stopping the spread. And after explaining all these mechanics and things like that, we let the reader play, and change these parameters. We let them change what percentage of the population is vaccinated. We let them change the R naught. We let them change how effective the vaccine is, and how those parameters reflect um, in the spread. So we have explained first, and then towards the end, we are letting the reader explore. Another example of that is the story I did about government schools in Delhi several years ago. And if in the story I tell you something about government schools in Delhi, I tell you we have these many schools, these many, like, what was like the size of these schools, and then of course they are in more populated schools, are in more populated neighborhoods, and then but only few have class 9 to 10th, and how many people get from class 9 to 10, um, and then how many secondary schools are there in the so like, the number of schools keep getting smaller as you keep going down, and then only these many schools offer the science stream, so how your choices are limited. And if you're a girl, it's even harder to go to a school that offers science. And then I pick out one girl, if she lives in Sangam Vihar, how easy would her to be to access a school where she can study science at the secondary level? And after explaining all of that, I let the reader pick these choices and see what their choices are like. So if a boy is studying commerce as opposed to a girl is studying commerce, or if it's within science, it's a girl or a boy, which schools are left? You see which pockets remain devoid of choices, which pockets have choices. So it's towards the very end, I let the reader explore after I have explained the problem. Then the next story structure is the diamond. And the diamond starts with like an anecdotal example. Then you tell them something about what the story is about. You give a lot of detail and background, and then you end with an anecdote again. Now, this is a story I did about Bollywood music. I am a big fan of Bollywood songs. I think one of my very hidden talents is my Antakshari skills. So this story was something I was fascinated by. I was watching an interview of Anupama Chopra with some singers where where they mentioned that, how every other song is now sung by Arijit Singh, whereas earlier you would look at music cover and it would all be Lata Mangeshkar and Asha Bhosle, and it was interesting that, here's a field that was actually dominated by women and now is dominated by men, which is like playback singing when it comes to solo songs. So for that, I start with an anecdote. I pick out 2017 and I show what the split is like with songs that are sung just by women and songs that are sung just by men. Then I tell you what is happening. I tell you what the story is about. This was not always the case, that this is a shift that has happened. And then I show that in a chart. I show that shift in a chart. And then I get into more details about it, when exactly did the shift happen, how it was because more and more singers entered the market, who ruled the market when. It's all like background information. And then I ask a question that what led to this explosion of songs that were sung only by men? And I do some old school reporting where I talk to some experts and some music directors and figure out what shifted. And they gave the reasons such as how the lip sync faded in movies, how the storyline shifted, and that changed what songs ended up in the movie. So you contextualize your findings with stuff. So again, more background information. And towards the end, I compare again 2016 and 2017. I pick out select movies and talk about, again, I end with an anecdote. And there's also this exploratory bit where you can look at different decades, you can pick out movies and see what the gender split is like. But if you're talking about exploration, the assumption might be that dashboards are just exploratory and interactive. I don't think so. That need not be the case. Dashboards are not all about clicking buttons and picking out which charts and things like that. Dashboards are also about telling stories. And for that, I want to talk about our coronavirus dashboards. So if you come to the Reuters coronavirus dashboard, you don't see global figures at first. You see three random headlines. These are generated by algorithms that recognize what's interesting happening where there's an uptick, where there's a downtick, who's reporting highest numbers in XYZ day, where there are big rises, so things like that. And we just give you plain English and tell you what's happening. There's no fancy charts, there's nothing. It's just a sentence telling you something interesting. And then we come down, here's like these countries have the highest cases, these countries have the highest deaths. And then because vaccination is the most important thing right now, everybody's concerned about. So we tell who's vaccinating the fastest with respect to their populations. Then we have this metric where we talk about the peak. Instead of comparing absolute cases, we wanted to show where different countries might be with respect to their own pandemic. India, for example, if you right now, the cases that you're recording is only 15% of what they were when it was the highest in the entire thing. So, it's like slightly interactive and all of that. But at the same time, we are explaining what it means in pure English. We are telling you why this matters. We are telling you what this means, why this is a better metric than comparing absolute cases and things like that. And then we, show trends by region. But even here, before a chart, we are using words to tell you something about it. That how many of them are coming from Asia, if out of every 100 cases. So using a combination of words and visuals ends up being a very nice pairing. In absolute independent terms, they aren't that effective, but when paired together, they can be extremely powerful. And towards the end, we let you go to whatever country you want to explore and see if you're interested in any stats. So this brings me to the point of where to use words. You want words to complement the visual elements and enhance the picture without describing what the reader can see for themselves. So I think that's the distinction of bringing in words to add a layer to the visuals. And then there's this another bit of when it comes to information, do I zoom in or do I zoom out when telling the story? In my experience, it needs to be a combination of the two. And that brings me to the hourglass. So you zoom out, you zoom in, and then you zoom out. That's one story structure as well. So for that, I have this example of story about groundwater in India. I show you this map that gives you an overview of how bad it is in India. You see the North India red spot and how the decrease is happening there significantly. And then as you scroll in the story, I see I show you how different districts line up in this experience. Which districts have good groundwater levels as opposed to which are depleting their resources as sized by their population. And you end up seeing, how many people live in areas that have decent groundwater as opposed to how many live in areas that have beyond their available resources. So Ghaziabad, of course, is overexploiting groundwater. And then after this, you zoom out again. Now from the district level, I go back to the state level. And then after this, I zoom out further from the state level, I go to the national level. And it helps you put things in perspective. The zooming in is adding up as a very, like for someone who is from Bangalore or Ghaziabad to see where their hometown or district lines are, as opposed to also get the overview of what it actually means in the global context of what the state in India is like. So if I were to recap all that I spoke about, these are like four key decisions you're making in terms of architecting different structures of the different elements of your story when it comes to telling these visual narratives. And if I were to talk about how these decisions aid curiosity, we structure in a way to hook the reader in the beginning or to leave an impact in the end. So that's how the order can, act as a very effective way to pique a curiosity. Then we explain to pique their curiosity and let the reader explore to feed it. And that works great with, these elements that these kind of stories that people call explorable explanations. It's a whole genre of visual stories as well. And and then you use words to complement the visual elements, and that also aids to a person's curiosity when they look at a chart. Oh, this is what it actually means. This is the context behind this chart. And you zoom out for the overview and context, but you zoom in to satisfy the curiosity. And that's kind of like how these different story forms can be used to tell stories in a more like something that feeds the curious soul. And that is me, and my talk ends here as per my progress bar. So I'm up for any questions that people might have.
All right, Gurman, thanks a lot. That was a lovely presentation. Trust me, I'll never see a martini glass the same way again, especially if someone spills the drink in the bar. Uh, Also, I've never seen news stories being actually described in this way, the frameworks or anything like that. So what I'll do is,
Because you didn't go to journalism school.
yeah, yeah. So this is. I think this is the great way of saying that if you are someone who can bring two or three different disciplines together, that automatically opens up a whole new perspective in a way, a whole new way in which to see things. Now, I'll start off with a classic chicken and egg question. What comes first, the framework or the story?
The story, then you pick the framework that best suits the story. You won't know, you have to do your reporting first, and then you figure out what is the narrative in which it might suit. Sometimes you just play around as well. You try one and you show it to your editors, and they're like, what if you switch this around? And then you go back and see, oh, maybe that works better. It's often hit and trial, but you first need to do the reporting to know which format might suit it.
Got it. At this point, I forgot to remind attendees, if you are on Zoom, please use the Q&A tab to ask your questions for Gurman. If you are on YouTube or any other live stream channel, then you can use the live chats or any chat option there available to put in your question there, and it will be forwarded to me over here. All right. Uh, I'll take a question that Manish asks, which is it's quite relevant. Like in a newsroom settings where things move at crazy speed, information is never enough. How do you choose one of these narratives with confidence?
I think you just get it with practice. You get better with
Okay.
practice. The more you do it, the more intuitive it becomes. As a newbie, I was horrible at it. My stories would not have a narrative period. Forget about a type of narrative. It would just be facts, a collection of facts. But you get better at it. You editors help you figure out as well. And I like sometimes, as I said, right, like for example, the chronological events, that when there are events that demand a chronology that would fit better, you know, places where you want the reader to explore things, and where the data allows for that and the data demands that, so you pick those bits and pieces. Yeah, it's just that it gets more intuitive with time. And honestly, nobody, like an editor won't say that, oh, let's do a diamond for the story. That's not how people talk. These are more like how academics have driven these frameworks. A
Yeah.
few of, like one or two of them might be things that I've modified, but most of them are things that researchers have looked at different articles and looked at trends that pop up, like the techniques that pop up, and try to give them a framework. Yeah.
Oh, got it. So you're saying that at this point of time, first you write the story, you produce it and all, and then later on, all the academics come and they say, "Oh, this is the structure is should be called this."
This
So
is a
these,
martini glass. They
yeah,
say
this is
this
a
is a
margin.
martini glass.
So you're saying that these classifications have not come from within the journalist community; they have come from external observers and commentators.
Yeah. And these
Okay.
might also be journalists that move to academia and study journalism there. So that way, but in journalism school, they will definitely teach you the inverted pyramid and things like that.
Got it. So let me also jump to other questions that the audience have asked first. So Siddharth Singhal asks, are these storytelling frameworks relevant only for written or visual formats, or can these be applied to verbal communication as well? What are your thoughts on how those formats differ?
So some of the inverted pyramid is also a very classic thing that you would see in, say, TV news. TV is both, like, of course, a combination of your visual and audio thing. But if you go back to podcast and radio, even there you would see a lot of anecdotal leads, and then going deeper and telling one story. So yeah, these story techniques apply everywhere. It's just a storytelling technique. I would say that if you're doing a business presentation, you could use it there too. So it's just a method of how do you capture a person's attention, how do you satisfy their curiosity, and, like, how do you communicate what you're trying to communicate. It's more of a communication technique as opposed to a journalistic technique, I would say.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to frame it. It's not bound to any particular medium for that matter, or any
Yeah.
particular
Yeah.
format for that matter. Okay. Uh, so someone who chooses to not name himself or herself says, has a question. Any story that was the most difficult to visualize and how you dealt with it? So can you think of
Mm,
any such experience? Very hard to visualize.
I think, like, especially if you're talking about death, is very hard to visualize in general, because you're talking about a very serious tragedy. Essentially, you're talking about a tragedy, and you want people to stay people when you're telling the story and not just become numbers. So death always is a very hard thing to cover. In the case of COVID, we did this bit where, when, like, the deaths were at their peak, at
Mhm.
in June, July, and people were dying everywhere. And to talk about that, we spoke about the pace of death. And it's a very sobering number that one person in the world was dying every 17 seconds or every 18 seconds. And when you put it in that way, it becomes much more powerful. And of course, that these many people are dying every day and you're reporting these numbers. But to reduce in those seconds, I think, yeah, death always is very hard. And to think of ways that makes people remember that we are talking about actually a tragedy. That's quite hard.
All right. So anything to do with any morbid story for that
Yeah,
matter
any
would
morbid
be
story for that matter, because you don't want a chart to dilute the tragedy.
dilute the big thing. It
Yeah,
otherwise.
yeah.
So do you feel? And I think as an extension to this, do you feel visualization sometimes falls more in the entertainment space, or rather than learning and information space, like, or at least is often mistaken for that?
I think in terms of COVID has proven that entirely wrong, right? Like it's a story that's driven entirely by visualizations and data, and where cases are picking up, who's managing their pandemic well, who has lost control, where older people are dying, where it's younger population, so things are fine. So like those kinds of things, those are scientific questions and
Mm-hmm.
things that are have been crucial in managing this disaster that's struck the world. It's entirely driven by data and visualizations. The log charts, people got comfortable reading log charts because of that, and I think that's saying something. It's definitely not just for entertainment. It's COVID has definitely, broken, shattered
Broken.
any of those beliefs if they existed. This year has been of too many line charts.
Last year, I hope this year will not be of too
Yeah, oh,
many line
sorry,
charts.
sorry. Last year, I'm still there. I'm still in March 2020. Like
Okay,
all
let's
of
get
us.
you back to 2021 with the next question. Uh, how do you? So this is a question from Archit, who's asking, how do you get viewers to believe your facts or sources, or
Mm.
are we doomed to have only people who believe certain things? Read stories that support these points. Believe certain things. Read stories that support these points. No, I'm not very clear about this question, the second part. But I believe what Archit is trying to ask is that how do you get viewers to believe your facts or sources, and do we always trust the personality that it's coming from this place? That's why it must be true.
So we caveated, for example, when I was talking about the tractor story. Uh, the getting how many tractors were there, it's like practically not possible. Nobody was sitting there counting tractors. And if you ask the farmers, they say we had 2 lakh tractors. If you ask the police, they say like maybe on one side there were these many tractors. You tell the reader both. You tell this side is saying this side is saying this. I am visualizing what this side is saying. And if the other side is true, that means it's this. Now, that means it would be, 10 times of what I've shown, something like that. So we dealt with that ambiguity in that
Mhm.
manner. I think data in general, there's a grave issue in data vision, and like a lot of research has been done on that. And how do you communicate ambiguity, because all data is ambiguous. Saying data is absolute is a falsified thing. Just because information is in a spreadsheet doesn't mean it's the gospel truth. Somebody's putting things in a spreadsheet, and somebody with biases and somebody with parameters is putting things in a spreadsheet. So some information is always going to be missing. And kind of communicating the reader what information is there, what is not there, what might be missing, and what we can say, what we cannot say are the things that you do. You can't make a reader believe you. The sad part is that within the age of misinformation, people believe anything. So only the responsible thing you can do is tell them where you're coming from, what your process and methodology has been, and leave for the reader to decide, if they want more or are they satisfied. Yeah.
Got it. Got it. Got it. Okay, so another question from Lal Poster. I guess this is on YouTube. Asks, how do you choose when to make a visual interactive with tooltips? I read your blog on this. So it's clearly someone who's a fan. I read your blog on the same, but why I still ask is because always important to bring out specific details. I think, and I don't have the rest of the line that he's trying to.
And
So
dot
how
dot
do you
dot.
choose? And dot dot dot.
um,
Yeah.
so
So
uh,
how do you choose?
So I avoid tooltips. It's
Okay.
very because it's hard work to get tooltips on and work on every device. And on a breaking news situation, tooltips are like you just don't have the time to code it out. We do a lot of static visualizations with annotations because, especially in a breaking news situation, like if earthquake has happened and I'm saying how bad this earthquake was in respect to others, and I'm talking about magnitude and scale, I might just do a static chart, put some annotations, put it out there. Uh, why? Because maybe the reader need not explore, giving what we have. Like if you look at usage analytics, I'm not talking in particular about Reuters, but I'm talking about studies that have been done by the New York Times interactive team.
Mhm.
They say only 10 to 11% of your readers use tooltips.
Yeah.
Rest don't, especially people on mobile do not. And the thing with tooltips, but the point is these 10% people might be your most dedicated readers. Like they really, really will engage, and the time spent on the page will be really, really high. So when it comes to a COVID dashboard, of course we want to have tooltips because it's a dashboard. But
Yeah.
when it comes to a story, maybe if the narrative is doing the job, maybe I don't need a tooltip. So for example, there's a story I did, which I did not show today, but it was about the Indian elections in 2019. And I showed the faces of all 8,500 candidates that contested. The idea to show their face was to show the scale of things. Like, this is this huge election, so many people contest, these many are men, these many are women, and like drive home certain points about the people who were contesting, how much wealth they have, how much criminal cases and things like that. Now the idea of that is not to help someone choose who to vote for. The idea of that is to show scale. So I do need not make it in a way that I hover over a person's face and I get to know who they are, where they're fighting from. Because adding that interactivity or tooltip, A, would be expensive because I have to load 8,500 images separately. And B is unnecessary because I am telling the story. It's not a place for them to come in and see who to vote for. So I think it
Yeah.
really depends on the use case. That if the use case is more of a story and sharing a finding, maybe I don't need a tooltip. If it's a dashboard and it's to help the user make a particular decision or learn something that's based on their experience, we will add tooltips.
Got it. I take the next question from another or someone in, I think, in YouTube, Ashish, who asks, "How do you figure out a feeling to do a data story like you did with a Bollywood song story?"
Curiosity. You read things and you become curious about it, and you ask the question, oh, I wonder why this is happening, I wonder if I can prove it. And you get that feeling of curiosity, and you go and you chase that curiosity. And I get that all the time. Reading helps a lot. The more you read, the more news information you consume, the more questions you get.
Yeah.
And that helps. Yeah.
Okay. So Lal Poster, who had asked the question before this, has another one. Coming from an anthropology qualitative background, I feel data visualization, which is stats in general, reduces people to numbers. How do I deal with morality of this situation?
Yeah, that's as I was talking about earlier. That's like a very tricky bit, right? But I think there are ways to combat it. So, for example, if I'm talking about 8,500 candidates, and instead of saying there were 8,500 candidates and making a line chart of how the number of candidates have increased over time, I put on faces of these people on a page. And the minute I do that, it hits me, oh my God, these are real people. And these people are not ending. Like these people, more people, more people, more people, more people. So that's one way of making sure people remember they're human. Similarly, there was this piece that my colleagues did back in 2015, 2016, where we were still grappling with, humanizing data and with things
Mhm.
like we talk about data humanism. And within that, they were talking about the Rohingya crisis. And they decided to do crowds of actual people that my teammates drew, like illustrated people, to show how the scale of the refugee crisis kept increasing. So using humans is one way to do it. Mona Chalabi, who is like excellent on Instagram, does these hand-drawn illustrations to use data in a very human manner. I think using illustrations is one way to humanize things. Um, I did another talk on like how do you create relatable visualizations.
Mm-hmm.
And illustrations is one way to do it. Using actual people is thinking of data as not data, but as in more visual forms. For example, I did a piece about pollution in Delhi, where we installed a camera on top of a rooftop to click pictures. So instead of saying PM 2.5 is rising, I showed two photos next to each other and showed what 40 PM 2.5 is like and 400 is like. And so you see it in a more visual manner, and it's much more relatable than a line chart. So I think you think of these other visual ways to tell a story as opposed to just making bar charts and line charts.
Right. Okay. I At this point of time we have about 3 or 4 minutes more with Gurman. If there are any other questions, feel free to shoot. I'll just ask a couple of them. I'll take a step back, and also audience members, at 1:30, I'll do the closing talk where we'll reveal the quiz link which you can take, and you might be able to win one of the 4 different prizes we have. Right. I'd like to take a step back from pure anthropological questions or qualitative questions and all these things that were being talked about, and get take the conversation back towards information architecture. uh, in in your work and in the work of journalism, what do you feel is the role of information architecture, or collecting a lot of information, organizing, structuring it to be able to create stories? Now, do you feel that that's a very common practice? And if that is or is not, how does one hone that practice, or improve on that, to be able to find out stories by structuring information and analyzing them better?
So, one thing that I have been personally working on over the last couple of months is to structure my notes better. Because the research that you do, journalists in core are researchers. We talk to people, we read literature, and we ask questions, and we try to answer questions. So to make my research more structured, because I am honestly a very, very, very unorganized human being, and it's quite limiting to read all these things and just have notes here and there and things like that. So I've been trying, because a friend of mine just would meet me every time and be like, Gurman, you need to make better notes. You need to make better notes. So I think that's one way, one thing that's very important. So story ideas that people have, they might get lost. I know a lot of reporters who will have spreadsheets of story ideas they have, stories they would someday like to work on, projects they would like to do. I know reporters who have spreadsheets of RTIs they file, so to track them, because it's part of the reporting process. You're chasing people, oh please respond to my request, how many days has it been, which ones I have to file, which ones I am filing again, which one I have to follow up. So like, to structure these processes that are part of the reporting process, I think organizing information is crucial, because otherwise it is extremely hard to manage and do the job you want to do. That's one thing for sure where it's useful. More organized note taking, because the reporter's notebook is
What
crucial,
about the
and
other? What
modern
about the other
classical.
side? What about the other side, wherein when if you have already created, I'm sure Goodman by now you would have created hundreds of visualization, if not thousands. Then if you have to present it at one place, at one platform, say Reuters for that matter, even at the point of presentation level, you will have to organize them in different ways so that the information is easily findable by people who will come in and
Yeah.
consume that information. How does that exercise go? How do you or your team decide that this is the first story that we should keep, or which is the way in which people should be able to navigate and find your story? Is there any thought process that you can share on that piece, when you have,
So
like, because the world has hundreds of stories happening at the same time?
yeah. So one thing, of course, is that you are probably publishing the story while it's relevant. So you would be doing something on uh,
Chronologically, in a way.
No, it's timeliness. I'm talking about
Yeah.
timeliness. So, for
Okay.
example, if fires happen in California, we
Yeah.
would be covering it while it's happening, or
Okay.
just after it's finished. No, few people are going to care about several months from it after the event has happened. So, the timeliness helps because that will help us distribute it in other stories that we're doing about the event. Socially, we get a lot of traffic when it's a timely story. So that way the timeliness helps. Then otherwise, even on a graphics, we have a graphics portal where you viewers can go and readers can go and search stories by subject or by people. So if someone's interested in the environment, or someone's just really interested in coronavirus, if someone's just interested in Brexit, they can
Mm-hmm.
go and navigate our stories that way. But
Okay.
I think most of the few people will go on that page and look for graphics. Most people will stumble upon it when someone shared it, or when it's there within a story, linked in a story, and things like that.
Got it.
The
Got it.
thing about Reuters is also because we are a B2B model, so some of our graphics will also be picked up by other news organizations.
Yeah.
So you really don't know where and how people might discover it. So if Straits Times has like embedded a line chart about the COVID that we
Mm-hmm.
made, maybe somebody is exploring our dashboard through that. So yeah, it varies, and there are multiple ways you can get to it.
Got it. So we've just completed our time. My very closing question at this point of time will be: out of the hourglass and martini glass and all of which of them are your favorite? And did you have you invented your own framework by now?
I think the zoom in, zoom out one,
The
the
hourglass.
hourglass is actually it was a modified version. The actual one uses different words. So I would say it's my modified framework of the
Okay.
original hourglass. It's
All right.
inspired by the original hourglass.
Okay.
But I love the spilled martini because
Okay.
I love leaving readers explore in the end. I also love like zooming in and zooming out.